Hello again. Welcome back to my Federalist paper series. Today we'll be covering Federalist numbers 6 and 7. They were written by Alexander Hamilton with the title Concerning Dangers from Dissensions Between the States. Whereas Federalists 2 through 5 were concerned with foreign dangers resulting from disunion, Federalists 6 and 7 is about domestic dangers from disunion. So Federalist number 6 begins with a postulation of human nature. Men are ambitious, vindictive, and rapacious. Hamilton is suggesting that humans are naturally and indelibly endowed with characteristics that make conflict inevitable. They are designing, jealous, greedy, spiteful, and self-interested. And so, to an extent, so must nations. To look for a continuation of harmony between a number of independent, unconnected sovereignties in the same neighborhood would be to disregard the uniform course of human events and to set at defiance the accumulated experiences of ages. If America were to split into a number of different independent countries instead of unite, to pretend that there would be any eternal peace would be to ignore history and the nature of the men who comprise it. Hamilton contends that there are just too many factors that contribute to hostility between nations. He cites the love of power, jealousy, desire for safety, and commercial competition as one class of incitements. However, Hamilton notes that the passions and interests of leading individuals may also singularly determine the fate of nations and the harmony between states. Hamilton is borderline presaging a variation of the great man theory of history. This theory proposes that the course of history is often explained and driven by certain incredibly influential leaders in politics, philosophy, art, science, literature, and religion. The great man theory had its supporters and analogues in the likes of Ralph Waldo Emerson, William James, and Friedrich Nietzsche, but it has largely fallen out of favor of academics today. Anyways, Hamilton points to the ancient Greek general, Pericles, who he accuses of destroying the city of Samos based upon his personal whims, which were contrary to the interests of his people, and he charges him with having occasioned the onset of the Peloponnesian War, which ended in the absolute ruin of his home state of Athens. Likewise, Thomas Wolsey, King Henry VIII's cardinal and chief advisor, held for a time uncontested power over the policies of England, and in that position he put his own gross ambition over the safety and benefit of his countrymen, instigating a war with France and playing into the hands of the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. Hamilton also briefly name-drops Madame de Maintenon, the secret wife of King Louis XIV, the Duchess of Marlborough, a close confidant of Queen Anne, and Madame de Pompadour, chief mistress of King Louis XV, as personalities who all exerted an exorbitant influence over the affairs of Europe. Hamilton concludes this line of thought by suggesting that, had not personal struggles induced him to do so, Shays' rebellion in Massachusetts may have never occurred. Continuing on, Hamilton moves to address his critics, who will undoubtedly intend to argue that the disunion of America is no cause for concern because the genius of republics, say they, is pacific. The spirit of commerce has a tendency to soften the manners of men, and to extinguish those inflammable humors which have so often kindled into wars. Commercial republics, like ours, will never be disposed to waste themselves in ruinous contentions with each other. They will be governed by mutual interest, and will cultivate a spirit of mutual amity and concord. That is to say, anti-federalists will argue that republican forms of government are inherently inclined to peace, and furthermore, commercial states have a disinterest in engaging in war. This is what is today called democratic peace theory and capitalism peace theory, respectively. Nevertheless, Hamilton is not buying it. He asks a series of rhetorical questions in order to cast doubt upon his opponent's assumptions. Is it not, we may ask these projectors in politics, the true interest of all nations to cultivate the same benevolent and philosophic spirit? If this be their true interest, have they in fact pursued it? Has it not, on the contrary, invariably been found that momentary passions and immediate interest have a more active and imperious control over human conduct than general or remote considerations of policy, utility, or justice? Have republics in practice been less addicted to war than monarchies? Are not the former administered by men as well as the latter? Are not popular assemblies frequently subject to the impulses of rage, resentment, jealousy, avarice, and of other irregular and violent propensities? Has commerce hitherto done anything more than change the objects of war? Is not the love of wealth as domineering and enterprising a passion as that of power or glory? Have there not been as many wars founded upon commercial motives since that has become the prevailing system of nations, as were before occasioned by the cupidity of territory or dominion? Hamilton thinks that an empirical study of man is sufficient to dispel any and all idealism about his nature and his governments. They say republics in commerce will lessen the propensity toward war. Hamilton replies that Sparta, Athens, Rome, and Carthage were all republics, and they were as often engaged in wars, offensive and defensive, as the neighboring monarchies of the same times, and Athens and Carthage were even commercial. The Republic of Venice was such a hostile terror to its neighbors that Pope Julius II assembled a military coalition to end her obstinacy. Holland never hesitated to engage in the balancing act of Europe, even up to the point of ruin. Britain's House of Commons demonstrates no particular aversion to war. Hamilton writes, "There have been, if I may so express it, almost as many popular as royal wars. The cries of the nation and the importunities of their representatives have, upon various occasions, dragged their monarchies into war, or continued them in it, contrary to their inclinations, and sometimes contrary to the real interests of the state." Hamilton concludes from all of this that there should be zero expectation that an America divided into separate governments will exist among each other in a state of peace and permanent friendship. Nay, Hamilton agrees with the remark that neighboring nations are naturally enemies of each other. And so ends Federalist 6. But what could a disunited America even fight over, though? This is the fundamental question Federalist number 7 aims to answer. Well, Hamilton asserts territorial disputes are a common point of contention among different nations, and perhaps would especially be so in America. For starters, in 1787, there was vast swaths of unsettled land belonging to the former government under the Articles of Confederation, and assuredly the states who claimed territories and then ceded them to that government would want them back. Furthermore, other states with no formal claim to the land would demand a peace as well, arguing that the territories became common stock under the Articles and now must be divided up as such. With no new federal government to settle such disputes, violence would almost certainly be unavoidable. Hamilton illustrates the intensity of land disputes with examples such as Connecticut and Pennsylvania's battles over the Wyoming Valley, and New York's clashes with her neighbors over the future of Vermont. The next likely point of dispute among the states is that of commerce. Once divided, the states would develop independently from each other. They would construct their own commercial policies and naturally pursue their own self-interests. In that, varying positions of advantage and disadvantage would open up between the states. Hamilton conjures up a probable hypothetical here to demonstrate the point involving his state of New York and its neighbors, Connecticut and New Jersey. New York, as a major hub for trade, by virtue of its economy and needs, must enact duties, also known as taxes, on imports. Such duties would be paid by the consumers who purchase the goods, a disproportionate amount of whom would be citizens of neighboring states who come to New York to shop. This means that the higher costs residents of Connecticut and New Jersey would be paying for products would be funding the state of New York and its betterment, with themselves seeing none of that direct benefit. A situation such as this would obviously foster resentment, and New York would be unwilling and unable to change anything about it without harming her own citizens at the expense of residents in what would essentially be a foreign nation. Next, Hamilton makes the case that the issue of the public debt could incite general conflict. You see, when a government wants to finance things, like a war for example, they can sell bonds to the public, which are a security you can buy under the promise that the government will repay you back at a later date with interest. However, after the Revolutionary War, and under the Articles of Confederation, the government was unable to pay back its creditors. Hamilton believed the only way to remedy this was a stronger central government under the Constitution. In any case, disunion, he argues, would exacerbate the problem. If the United States broke up, sorting out who discharges what debts would be an absolute mess. This would be augmented by states who would not take serious the matter and try to get out of paying anyone for anything. Other states would simply be unable to pay on their own, even if they wanted to. Meanwhile, the citizens who invested in their country under the pledge of repayment would justifiably grow increasingly angry, and tensions would quickly rise in dual contests of man versus state and state versus state. Finally, Hamilton makes a straightforward point about the violation of private contracts attendant in disunion. The separate and rival governments in America would in all probability pass laws in one state that violate the laws, contracts, and spirit of another. Such affronts, he asserts, lead only to war. Hamilton ends this essay with a solemn warning. The conclusion is to be drawn that America, if not connected at all, or only by the feeble tie of a simple league, offensive and defensive, would, by the operation of such jarring alliances, be gradually entangled in all the pernicious labyrinths of European politics and wars, and by the destructive contentions of the parts into which she was divided, would be likely to become a prey to the artifices and machinations of powers equally the enemies of them all. And so we've reached the end of another entry in this series. If you found this video helpful or interesting, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.